Billionaire CEO wore rags to single dad's restaurant. She thought she was testing kindness, but when the poor cook fed her for free, her secret shattered. And what he did next made an entire boardroom freeze mid-meeting. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the worn linoleum floor of Eli's diner. The light caught the chrome edges of the counter stools, making them sparkle despite their age. Behind the griddle, Eli Brooks worked with quiet focus, his movements precise from years of both military discipline and cooking experience. The sizzle of pancake batter hitting the hot surface filled the air with a homey sweetness. "Order up," he called, sliding 2 plates of steaming pancakes onto the counter. Only 3 customers occupied the tables this morning. Another slow day. The regular morning rush had dwindled to barely a trickle over the past few months. In the corner booth, Grace hunched over her coloring book, her brown curls falling forward as she concentrated on staying within the lines. Crayons were scattered across the red vinyl seat beside her. The morning light made her look so much like her mother that it caught in Eli's throat for a moment. "How's the masterpiece coming along, sweetheart?" Eli asked, walking over to refill the coffee cup of Mr. Jenkins, their elderly regular who came in every morning like clockwork. Grace held up her coloring book, beaming. "Look, Daddy, I made the angel's dress rainbow-colored." The pride in her voice made his heart squeeze. "That's beautiful, honey." He ruffled her hair gently before heading back behind the counter. When the breakfast crowd, if you could call 3 people a crowd, had cleared out, Eli sat at his small desk in the back office, staring at a stack of bills. The red final notice stamp on the electric bill seemed to mock him. The rent check for the diner was due in 3 days, and Mr. Thompson, the landlord, had already warned him about another increase coming. Eli rubbed his temples, trying to massage away the growing headache. The calculator displayed numbers that refused to add up to anything but trouble. He'd already cut back on everything he could think of, working double shifts, reducing inventory, even switching to cheaper coffee brands, though that experiment had lasted exactly 1 day before his regulars complained. "Daddy?" Grace's voice pulled him from his worried calculations. She stood in the doorway, clutching her coloring book to her chest. "Are you sad?" Eli forced a smile. "No, sweetie, just doing some grown-up math." Grace patted over and climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done in a while. "Don't worry so much," she said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "God's gonna send us help, Daddy. I asked him special in my prayers last night." Eli hugged her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Is that right?" "Uh-huh. And he always listens, remember? That's what Mommy used to say." The mention of Sarah, gone 3 years now, made his chest ache. But Grace was right. It had been one of Sarah's favorite sayings, especially during tough times. After closing time, when Grace was safely occupied with homework at their small apartment above the diner, Eli returned to the kitchen. The quiet of the empty diner pressed in around him as he knelt on the hard tile floor. The position was familiar. He'd spent countless nights like this during his deployments, seeking guidance in the darkness. "Lord," he whispered, his calloused hands clasped together, "I know you have a plan. I'm trying to stay strong for Grace, but—" His voice cracked. "I could use some help here, some direction, anything." Miles away, in a sleek high-rise overlooking the city, Miranda Vale stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows. The board meeting replay played on her tablet, filling her penthouse with echoes of condescending laughter. "With all due respect, Miss Vale," her CFO's voice dripped with barely concealed disdain, "this compassion initiative would cost shareholders millions. We're not a charity." Miranda paused the video, her reflection in the glass showing the tight set of her jaw. 20 years of climbing the corporate ladder, building Vale Tech into a Fortune 100 company, and still they saw her suggestions for corporate responsibility as naive idealism. She moved to her pristine white couch, opening her laptop to scroll through dozens of articles about corporate ethics and social responsibility. Something was missing in all the academic theory and consultant speak, something real. The idea hit her suddenly, making her sit up straight. If she wanted to understand how people really treated each other, how compassion really worked in the real world, she needed to step out of her ivory tower. "Computer, call Janet," she commanded. Her assistant answered immediately. "Yes, miss." "Vale?" "Cancel all my meetings for the next 2 weeks. Personal emergency." "But the board? They can wait." "And Janet? Not a word about this to anyone. Understand?" After ending the call, Miranda moved with purpose through her penthouse. She pulled a worn duffel bag from the back of her closet, a relic from her college days before success transformed her life. Into it went several sets of plain clothes, jeans, t-shirts, a worn hoodie, things she hadn't worn in years. She added a few $100s in cash, her old student ID from before she was famous, and a prepaid phone. Nothing that could identify her as Miranda Vail, CEO of Vail Tech. Standing at her bedroom window, she looked out at the glittering city skyline. The corporate logo of her company glowed from several buildings, a reminder of everything she'd built, everything she was about to walk away from, even if just temporarily. Miranda zipped up the duffel bag with determination. It was time to see how the other half lived, not through spreadsheets and focus groups, but through real experience. Maybe then she'd understand what was missing from all her carefully crafted corporate initiatives. The city lights twinkled back at her, silent witnesses to her decision. Somewhere out there, beyond the gleaming towers and luxury condos, real people were struggling, helping each other, showing the kind of compassion her board dismissed as unprofitable. She was going to find them, understand them, and prove that business could be both profitable and humane. Miranda Vail stared at her reflection in the cracked motel mirror, watching a stranger stare back. The fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, casting harsh shadows that carved deep lines across her face and made her look 10 years older. Dark circles rimmed her eyes from a sleepless night spent questioning her sanity. She gathered her long, designer-styled hair into her fist hair that had been professionally colored and cut just last week at an exclusive Manhattan salon and picked up the drugstore scissors she'd bought the night before. The cheap plastic handles felt foreign in her manicured hands. With each rough, uneven cut, strips of dark hair fell into the stained porcelain sink below. Years of careful styling disappeared in minutes. The woman in the mirror grew more unrecognizable with every snip. Miranda's throat tightened as she watched her polished image crumble away, piece by piece. The transformation continued methodically, like dismantling her entire identity. Gone were her tailored street, John suits and silk blouses, replaced by thrift store finds that smelled faintly of mothballs and other people's lives. Faded jeans with frayed hems that bagged in all the wrong places, a thick wool sweater the color of old mustard, its sleeves stretched out from years of wear by someone else's arms, a winter coat with missing buttons and a torn lining that let the cold seep through. The scuffed boots she'd deliberately dragged across concrete yesterday now looked appropriately weathered, their once expensive leather scarred and dull. She rubbed dirt into the remaining clean spots until they looked like they'd walked 1,000 hard miles. She practiced her new voice in whispers, stripping away the confident, authoritative tone she'd cultivated over years of commanding corporate boardrooms and television interviews. "Excuse me, could you?" The words came out too crisp, too educated. She started again, softer, more hesitant, letting her shoulders curve inward. "I was wondering if maybe better, but still not quite right." She needed to sound invisible, forgettable, like someone the world had already decided to overlook. The cramped motel room held the last evidence of her old life. A designer suitcase now sat hidden in the musty closet behind a moth-eaten curtain. Her smartphone, the device that connected her to a billion-dollar empire, lay wrapped in tissue paper and buried at the bottom of the room's single dresser drawer. She'd keep only enough cash to survive as someone down on their luck, counting out wrinkled bills and loose change. Everything else that marked her as Miranda Vail, CEO of Nexus Technologies, disappeared into hiding like guilty secrets. At the motel office, she handed over her key without meeting the clerk's bloodshot eyes, hunching her shoulders slightly as she'd observed others do when they wanted to avoid attention or judgment. The man barely glanced at her, just another drifter checking out, another forgotten face passing through. The invisibility was already working, and it felt both liberating and terrifying. The local bus station smelled of diesel exhaust, stale coffee, and something Miranda couldn't quite identify but suspected was despair. She sat on a hard plastic chair that had been molded for efficiency rather than comfort, her single duffel bag clutched close to her chest like armor. Around her, early morning travelers hurried past with purpose, business people checking phones, students with overstuffed backpacks, workers carrying lunch pails and thermoses of coffee. No one looked her way. She might as well have been furniture. She bought a ticket to Riverbend, Ohio with crumpled $1 bills, counting them out slowly while the line behind her grew restless. The ticket agent's eyes glazed over with barely concealed impatience, his fingers drumming against the counter. "Gate 3? he said flatly, already looking past her to the next customer before she'd even stepped away. The bus was half empty, its seats worn down to the springs and upholstery that had seen too many travelers and not enough repairs. Miranda chose a spot near the back, away from the handful of other passengers, settling into a window seat where she could watch the world roll by. As the bus pulled away from the station with a wheeze of brakes and a cloud of black smoke, she watched the city skyline recede, all those gleaming towers, where she'd once commanded respect and fear, now shrinking into distant memory. Hours passed in a blur of highway and small towns. The landscape changed from urban to rural, strip malls and parking lots giving way to endless cornfields and scattered farms, with red barns and grazing cattle. Miranda's stomach growled audibly, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The woman across the aisle unwrapped a sandwich from a brown paper bag, and the simple smell of peanut butter and grape jelly made Miranda's mouth water. She had money in her bag enough for several meals, but that wasn't the point of this experiment. She needed to understand what it truly meant to have nothing, to depend on the kindness of strangers. At each stop along the route, passengers got on and off. Some gave her a wide berth as they passed her seat, their eyes sliding away from her unkempt appearance. Others simply looked through her as if she weren't there, as if her mere presence made them uncomfortable. Even the bus driver's eyes slid past her whenever she glanced toward the front. She was becoming a ghost, invisible to the world, exactly what she'd wanted, yet the reality of it stung in unexpected ways. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky when the bus finally rolled into Riverbend. The small town sprawled along a bend in the river that gave it its name, its main street lined with brick buildings that spoke of better days and forgotten dreams. Some storefronts stood empty, their windows papered over or boarded up. Others showed signs of stubborn life, a hardware store, a small grocery, a beauty salon with faded photographs in the window. As Miranda stepped down from the bus, her legs stiff from hours of sitting, the driver pulled away without a backward glance. The diesel fumes lingered in the crisp air that held the sharp edge of approaching winter. She pulled her borrowed coat tighter around her thin frame, adjusting the frayed scarf that scratched against her neck. Her stomach cramped with hunger as she walked down the quiet street, past closed shops and empty parking spaces marked by faded yellow lines. A few people hurried by, heads down against the wind, but none spared her a glance. She was truly invisible now, just another person life had forgotten. Then she saw it, a weathered wooden sign reading Eli's Place hanging over a small diner that looked like it had weathered decades of changing seasons. Warm yellow light spilled from its windows onto the darkening sidewalk, promising refuge from the growing cold. A handwritten note was taped to the glass door, its edges curled from weather. Help wanted, inquire within. The aroma of fresh coffee and home cooking drifted out each time someone opened the door, making her empty stomach clench with need. Miranda stood on the cracked sidewalk, her heart beating faster as she stared at the simple diner. This was it, the real test of her experiment. Everything until now had been preparation, costume, pretend. This was where she'd discover if her theory about human kindness had any truth to it. She reached for the door handle with a trembling hand, hesitated for just a moment as doubt crept in, then pulled it open and stepped into the unknown. The bell above the door chimed softly as Miranda stepped into Eli's diner. The warmth inside was a welcome relief from the chilly morning air. Old-fashioned red vinyl booths lined the walls, and a few wobbly tables dotted the center of the room. The linoleum floor showed years of wear, but it was clean and well kept. Behind the counter, Eli Brooks looked up from wiping down the coffee maker. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Welcome. Have a seat anywhere you'd like." Miranda hesitated, conscious of her ragged appearance. Her newly cut hair felt uneven, and the worn clothes hung loose on her frame. A mechanic in oil-stained coveralls glanced up briefly from his coffee before returning to his newspaper. She chose a spot at the counter, sliding onto one of the chrome-trimmed stools. The vinyl cushion squeaked beneath her. "Coffee?" Eli asked, already reaching for a mug. Miranda's fingers twisted in her lap. I'd like some, but I should tell you up front that I can't pay." Eli's movements didn't pause as he filled a clean, white mug with steaming coffee. "Don't worry about that." He set the cup in front of her, along with a small pitcher of cream. "Sugar's right there if you want it." He nodded toward a glass container. The rich aroma of the coffee made her throat tight. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, feeling the heat seep into her cold fingers. "Thank you. When's the last time you ate?" Eli asked quietly, his voice gentle and free of judgment. Miranda looked down at her coffee. "Yesterday morning." "Well, we can't have that." He turned toward the kitchen window. "How about some eggs and toast?" Maybe some bacon? I told you, I can't. And I heard you. His smile was warm and steady. But everyone needs to eat. Before she could protest further, he was already calling the order back to the kitchen. Miranda took a sip of coffee to hide the unexpected moisture in her eyes. The coffee was good, rich, and fresh. A small face peeked around the kitchen doorway. Grace Brooks studied the stranger at the counter with curious eyes. She tugged on her father's sleeve as he passed, whispering loudly enough for Miranda to hear, "She looks sad, Daddy." Eli smoothed his daughter's hair. "Sometimes people just need a good meal and a kind word, sweetheart." He guided her gently back toward the kitchen. "Why don't you go finish your homework?" The food arrived quickly, 2 eggs over easy, crispy bacon, and golden brown toast. The plate was garnished with a sprig of parsley, a small touch that spoke of pride and presentation despite the diner's humble appearance. "Eat up while it's hot," Eli encouraged, sliding silverware wrapped in a paper napkin toward her. Miranda cut into the first egg, watching the yellow yolk spread across the plate. The food was simple but perfectly cooked. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of Eli's occasional glances as he went about his morning routine, refilling the mechanic's coffee, wiping down tables, greeting the occasional customer who came in for coffee to go. When she finished, Miranda straightened her shoulders. "I'd like to wash dishes to pay for the meal." It was the least she could do, this woman she was pretending to be. Eli shook his head, collecting her empty plate. "You don't owe me anything." His eyes met hers, full of quiet conviction. Just promise to help someone else one day. The simple request struck her heart like a bell, clear and resonant. In all her years of corporate philanthropy, had she ever offered help with such pure intention? The morning stretched into afternoon. Miranda couldn't bring herself to leave the warmth of the diner. She nursed her coffee, watching the slow parade of customers come and go. Eli treated each one the same, from the well-dressed business people to the elderly couples counting out change for their lunch. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the front windows, Miranda finally stood to leave. She'd been there all day, and Eli hadn't once made her feel unwelcome. "Wait a minute," he called as she reached the door. She turned back, and he rubbed the back of his neck, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I could use some help around here, if you're interested. Part-time dishwashing, maybe some prep work. Pays not much, but—" Miranda felt something tight in her chest loosen. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'd like that. Come back tomorrow morning then, around 7? When she nodded, he added, "I'm Eli Brooks." "Miranda," she replied, giving only her first name. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." "Just Eli," he corrected with a gentle smile. "Everyone calls me Eli." She stepped out into the growing dusk, the bell chiming behind her. Through the window, she could see Eli beginning his closing routine, Grace now helping to wipe down the counter. The diner's warm light spilled onto the sidewalk like a beacon, and Miranda realized that in all her years of success and wealth, she'd never encountered such simple, unconditional kindness. Morning sunlight streamed through the smudged windows of Eli's diner, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Miranda stood awkwardly by the industrial sink, staring at the mountain of dishes before her. Her borrowed apron was tied crookedly, and wisps of her hastily cut hair kept falling in her eyes. "Start with the glasses," Eli suggested kindly, demonstrating the proper technique. "Hot water first, then sanitizer. Simple as that." His steady hands moved with practiced ease, showing her how to properly stack the clean dishes. Miranda nodded, trying to mirror his movements. The first glass slipped through her soap-slick fingers, clattering loudly in the sink. She flinched, expecting criticism, but Eli just chuckled. "Don't worry about it. Those ones are pretty much indestructible." Had to be, with Grace helping out since she could walk. As if summoned by her name, Grace appeared from around the corner, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. "Are you staying to help us?" she asked Miranda, eyes bright with curiosity. "Yes," Miranda answered softly. "Your father offered me a job." "Good." Grace beamed. "Maybe you can help me with my homework later. Daddy's terrible at math." "Hey now," Eli protested good-naturedly, ruffling his daughter's hair. "I can count just fine. How else would I know you ate 3 cookies yesterday instead of your usual 2? The morning rush began trickling in, mostly regulars who greeted Eli by name. A weather-beaten farmer in overalls ordered coffee and eggs, then slipped Grace a piece of hard candy when he thought no one was looking. 2 retired teachers shared a booth by the window, spreading out their daily crossword puzzle. Miranda watched as Eli worked the grill, somehow keeping track of every order while maintaining easy conversation with his customers. When a thin young man in a threadbare jacket came in, Miranda noticed how Eli automatically added extra hash browns to his plate without charging more. "Order up," Eli called out cheerfully. "And Joe, try these biscuits too. Just tried a new recipe and need an honest opinion." The young man's face lit up at the unexpected addition to his meal. "Thanks, Mr. Brooks. You're too good to me." Around mid-morning, a woman with silver-streaked hair and practical shoes entered the diner. Marcy Townsend carried herself with quiet authority, and her worried frown spoke volumes as she approached the counter. "Eli Brooks," she said, keeping her voice low, "we need to talk about your books." Eli wiped his hands on his apron. "Join me for coffee, Marcy?" They settled into a corner booth while Miranda pretended to focus on wiping down tables nearby. Grace had settled into her usual spot with her school books spread out before her. "The church committee is concerned," Marcy began, stirring sugar into her coffee. "We all know times are tough, but you can't keep feeding every hungry person who walks through that door for free. You've got Grace to think about." Eli's face remained serene. "You can't outgive God, Marcy. You taught me that yourself, remember?" "That's not fair. Using my own words against me," Marcy sighed, but there was fondness in her exasperation. "Just promise me you'll be careful?" The afternoon lull found Miranda organizing silverware while Grace colored nearby. The little girl's crayons moved across the paper in confident strokes, creating what appeared to be a family portrait. "Do you have any family?" Grace asked suddenly, looking up with innocent curiosity. "Maybe they could visit sometime?" Miranda's hand stilled on the forks she was sorting. "Not anymore," she answered softly, surprised by how much the simple truth hurt to say out loud. Grace considered this for a moment, then pushed her drawing across the table. "You can be in our picture then," she declared, reaching for a new crayon to add another figure to her artwork. As closing time approached, Eli began his nightly routine of wiping down the grill and counting the register. Miranda swept the floors, her muscles aching from the unfamiliar work but feeling oddly satisfied. "The storeroom has a cot," Eli mentioned casually as he locked up. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You're welcome to use it." Miranda shook her head, touched by the offer but unwilling to accept more kindness than she already had. "Thank you, but I'll be fine." The night air was crisp as she made her way to a nearby park. Finding an empty bench beneath a streetlight, Miranda settled down, pulling her jacket tight around her shoulders. Above her, stars dotted the clear sky, so much more visible here than in the city she'd left behind. Maybe compassion still exists, she whispered to the quiet night, remembering Eli's gentle patience, Grace's innocent acceptance, and even Marcy's concerned warnings about too much generosity. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Eli sorted through the stack of mail on his small office desk. Bills, advertisements, and more bills, the usual parade of paperwork that made his stomach knot. But today, something different caught his eye, a crisp white envelope with the bank's logo. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The last payment he'd missed had kept him awake at night, worried about losing the diner his family had poured their hearts into. As his eyes scanned the letter, they grew wide with disbelief. "Dear Mr. Brooks," he read aloud softly, "we are writing to inform you that your outstanding loan balance has been paid in full by an anonymous donor. Your account is now current, with no remaining balance." Eli had to sit down, the letter shaking in his hands. He read it 3 more times, making sure he hadn't misunderstood. The weight that had been pressing on his chest for months suddenly lifted. In the kitchen, Miranda was already at work, carefully organizing the morning's prep station. She kept her head down as Eli walked past, hiding a small smile that tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Grace!" Eli called out to his daughter, who was arranging silverware sets at the counter. "Come here, sweetheart. I need to show you something." Grace bounced over, her pigtails swinging. "What is it, Daddy?" Eli pulled her into his lap, showing her the letter. "Remember how you said God would send us help?" His voice was thick with emotion. "Well, look at this." Grace's eyes lit up as Eli explained what the letter meant. "I told you," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his neck. "God always listens." "Yes, he does," Eli agreed, hugging her tight. "He provides in mysterious ways, doesn't he?" Miranda busied herself with the dishes, but her ears caught every word. She thought about the secure website she'd used late one night from the library computer, carefully routing the payment through multiple charitable foundations to keep it anonymous. The joy in their voices made every penny worth it. As the morning progressed, regular customers began filtering in. Old Mr. Jenkins, who always ordered black coffee and wheat toast, noticed the Help Wanted sign was gone from the window. "So you found yourself some help?" he asked Eli, nodding toward Miranda. "Sure did," Eli replied warmly, "and she's a blessing." More locals started engaging with Miranda, curious about the quiet woman who'd become part of their morning routine. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the flower shop down the street, asked her to join their table during a slow period. "Where you from, dear?" she asked kindly. Miranda hesitated, then answered softly, "A little bit of everywhere, but this is the first place that's felt like it could be home." The days settled into a comfortable rhythm. After closing, Eli and Miranda would often find themselves talking over cups of coffee. One night, as they wiped down tables, Eli opened up about his wife. "Sarah loved this place," he said quietly, running his hand along a booth's worn leather. "She used to say a diner wasn't just about food, it was about giving people a place to belong." He paused, lost in memory. The cancer took her so fast. Grace was barely walking. Miranda's heart ached. "I'm sorry," she whispered. After a moment, she added, "I had a sister once. She lost her way, got so caught up in success and money that she forgot what really mattered." The truth wrapped in metaphor felt bitter on her tongue. "Did you ever find her again?" Eli asked gently. Miranda stared into her coffee. "I'm trying to." The evening wound down peacefully. Grace had already changed into her pink pajamas with little hearts, insisting on staying up just a little longer, please. Eli retrieved his old guitar from behind the counter, a battered instrument that had seen better days but still held its tune. The first few chords of Amazing Grace filled the empty diner. Eli's voice was soft but sure, carrying years of faith and struggle in every note. Miranda found herself humming along, the familiar hymn bringing back memories of church pews and Sunday mornings. Grace sat cross-legged on the counter, her small hands clapping in delight as her father played. Her eyes were heavy with sleep, but she fought to stay awake, swaying gently to the music. The last notes faded into the quiet diner, leaving behind a moment of perfect peace. Through the window, stars twinkled in the dark Ohio sky, watching over the little family and their unexpected guest. In that moment, Miranda felt further from her corporate world than ever before, and somehow more at home than she'd felt in years. Grace yawned widely, finally giving in to sleep. Eli set his guitar aside and scooped her up, her head settling naturally against his shoulder. "Time for bed, Angel," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Clara Jensen paced the pristine hallway of Vail Technologies' Manhattan headquarters, her Italian leather heels clicking against the polished marble floor in an increasingly frantic rhythm. The sound echoed off the towering walls lined with awards and accolades, each step marking another moment of her mounting anxiety. Her usually immaculate composure, the professional armor that had served her so well during 8 years of managing Miranda's complex schedule, had finally cracked after a week of deflecting increasingly aggressive inquiries about her boss's whereabouts. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling Manhattan streets 40 floors below, casting geometric patterns across the hallway's expensive artwork. But the golden light did nothing to warm the bone-deep chill of worry that had settled into Clara's chest like a stone. "What do you mean, there's nothing unusual?" Clara clutched her phone tighter against her ear, her knuckles white as she spoke in hushed, desperate tones to the private investigator she'd hired against company policy. Her free hand worried the delicate gold cross necklace at her throat, a nervous habit from childhood that resurfaced only during the worst crises. "She's the CEO of a Fortune 100 company with a market cap of $30 billion. People like Miranda Vail don't just vanish into thin air." The investigator's gravelly voice crackled through the speaker, tinged with the boredom of someone who'd seen too many missing persons cases. "Look, lady, I've traced her movements for the past week. There's a clear trail leading to Ohio, some podunk town called Millbrook. Small transactions on a card registered to an alias, bus ticket, cheap motel charges, diner purchases. Nothing that suggests foul play or coercion. Your boss went somewhere voluntarily." Clara's stomach churned with a mixture of relief and bewilderment. Ohio? The woman who complained when her private jet was delayed by 10 minutes had taken a bus to Ohio? She pressed her palm against the cool window glass, staring down at the ant-like pedestrians below. What could Miranda possibly be doing in a place that probably didn't even have decent Wi-Fi, let alone the kind of 5-star accommodations she was accustomed to? Behind her, the elevator chimed softly, and Clara spun around to see Marcus Rothwell, the most ruthless member of the board of directors, stepping into the hallway. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his Armani suit pressed to perfection, and his pale eyes held the cold calculation of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Miss Jensen," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had silenced boardrooms for 3 decades. "I trust you have an update on Miranda's sabbatical?" Clara forced her professional smile back into place, though it felt like wearing a mask that no longer fit properly. "Mr. Rothwell, good morning. Miranda is handling some urgent personal matters, but I expect to hear from her very soon." "Personal matters?" Marcus raised one perfectly groomed eyebrow. "In the middle of the Hartwell acquisition, when our stock price is fluctuating like a teenager's mood?" He stepped closer, and Clara caught the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the faint aroma of coffee and predatory ambition. "The board is asking questions, Miss Jensen. Questions I'm running out of creative ways to answer." Meanwhile, 300 miles away, in the warm, honey-colored glow of Eli's diner, Miranda methodically wiped down the red vinyl booths with practiced efficiency. The simple, repetitive motion of the cleaning cloth moving in careful circles had become almost meditative over the past week. Her hands, once soft from expensive spa treatments and manicures, now bore the honest calluses of real work, and she found herself oddly proud of these small badges of labor. She'd fallen into a comfortable routine that felt both foreign and strangely natural. Wake before dawn to help Eli prep for the breakfast rush. Take orders with handwriting that had improved from illegible scrawls to merely messy. Clear tables while listening to conversations about Little League games, church socials, and whose vegetable garden was producing the best tomatoes this season. But old habits died hard. Despite her determination to blend in, she couldn't help analyzing everything around her with the sharp business mind that had built an empire. Between customers, she jotted observations in the small, leather-bound notebook she kept tucked in her apron pocket. Notes about customer flow patterns, cost-saving opportunities, marketing strategies that could work in small-town environments. The notebook had cost more than most people in Millbrook spent on clothes in a month, but here it served as her anchor to a world that increasingly felt like a half-remembered dream. Eli emerged from the kitchen carrying a fresh pot of coffee, the sleeves of his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal forearms marked by years of honest work. Steam rose from the pot in lazy curls, filling the air with the rich aroma that had become one of Miranda's favorite scents. He noticed her tucking the notebook away with the quick reflexes of someone hiding something important. "Writing the great American novel over there?" he teased, his voice carrying the easy warmth that had drawn her in from the first moment. He slid the coffee pot onto the warming plate with the careful precision of someone who took pride in every small task. "Or maybe composing love letters to some lucky guy back wherever you came from?" Miranda felt heat rise in her cheeks at the gentle teasing. She managed a small smile, though something twisted in her chest at the mention of her old life. "Just thoughts. Things I don't want to forget." The words came out softer than she'd intended, carrying more truth than she meant to. "Reveal. Good memories are worth preserving," Eli said, his tone shifting to something gentler, more understanding. He'd noticed the shadow that sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was looking. The way she sometimes stared out the window, as if searching for something she'd lost. Grace bounced over from the corner booth where she'd been coloring, her blonde pigtails swinging with the enthusiastic energy that seemed to radiate from her small frame like sunshine. Her school backpack, decorated with patches of cartoon characters and rainbow stickers, bounced against her back with each step. "Miss Mandy, can you help me with my math homework later?" Grace's voice carried the kind of trust that only children possessed, complete and unquestioning. "Daddy says you're really good with numbers, and Mrs. Henderson gave us these super hard word problems about money and stuff." Miss Mandy had become Grace's special nickname for her, and Miranda found herself warming to it more with each passing day. The simple moniker felt genuine and earned, unlike the forced formality of Miss Vale that echoed through corporate boardrooms with calculated respect. Here, she was just Mandy, a woman who made mistakes, who struggled with simple tasks, who was learning to find joy in small moments. "Of course, sweetie." Miranda ruffled Grace's silky hair, marveling at how soft it felt between her fingers. She caught Eli's grateful look over his daughter's head, an expression that held depths of appreciation for the kindness shown to his most precious treasure. "We'll tackle those word problems together after dinner. I bet they're not as scary as they seem." Grace beamed and skipped back to her coloring, leaving Miranda with an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. When was the last time someone had needed her for something that actually mattered? When had she last felt useful for reasons that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices? As the afternoon wore on, the diner filled with the usual collection of regulars. Miranda had learned their names, their preferences, their small dramas and celebrations, but she couldn't help overhearing the whispered conversations that seemed to follow her from table to table, the growing curiosity about the mysterious woman who'd appeared in their midst like a character from someone else's story. Never says much about herself, does she? Mrs. Patterson whispered to her friend over coffee and a slice of Eli's famous apple pie. The elderly woman's voice carried the particular quality of someone who'd perfected the art of gossiping while appearing to mind her own business. Been here over a week now, and we still don't know where she came from or why she's staying. Jim at the hardware store swears she writes everything down in that little book of hers, her companion replied, leaning forward with the conspiratorial excitement of shared secrets. Says he saw her making notes about the layout of his store and asking questions about suppliers. Mighty suspicious, if you ask me. Could be one of those corporate spies, checking out our businesses for some big company buyout. Miranda's hand instinctively moved to protect the notebook in her pocket, her heart racing at how close to the truth their speculation had wandered. She forced herself to continue wiping tables with steady, measured strokes, fighting the urge to flee or defend herself. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, one of the most powerful women in corporate America, afraid of being discovered by two retirees with too much time and not enough entertainment. The sun had painted the sky in shades of amber and rose by the time they finished the closing routine. Miranda gathered her worn denim jacket, a thrift store purchase that had cost less than she usually spent on a single lunch, preparing for another night on the hard wooden bench in Millbrook's small park. The prospect filled her with a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion and everything to do with the loneliness that seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour of darkness. But Eli stood in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, concern etched in the lines around his kind eyes. The evening light caught the silver threads in his brown hair, and Miranda noticed for the first time how young he seemed, despite the weight of responsibility he carried. "Weather report says it's supposed to rain tonight," he said softly, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying not to wound pride while offering help. "Heavy storms coming in from the west. I can't in good conscience let you sleep out there in that." "I'll be fine," Miranda insisted, though the ache in her bones from 6 nights on the unforgiving bench told a different story. She'd woken each morning feeling like she'd been beaten. Her designer sleeping bag, even the compact, expensive kind, no match for the reality of homelessness. "I've managed this long." "The storeroom has a cot," Eli pressed, his persistence gentle but unwavering. "It's not much to look at, just a narrow bed and some boxes of supplies, but it's dry and warm. And honestly," he glanced toward the kitchen where Grace was finishing her homework at the counter, "Grace would never forgive me if I let Miss Mandy catch pneumonia. She's already worried about you sleeping outside like some stray cat." Something in his gentle insistence, in the genuine care that colored every word, broke through the defensive walls Miranda had built around her heart. She thought of her luxury penthouse, 40 floors above Manhattan, with its radiant heated floors, Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the kind of silence that money could buy. Yet somehow, this simple offer of shelter in a cluttered storeroom moved her more deeply than any expensive comfort ever had. The kindness in his eyes reminded her of something she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be cared for, not because of what she could provide, but simply because she was a human being who needed help. Just for tonight, she conceded, her voice barely above a whisper, thick with emotions she couldn't quite name. Eli's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face and making her understand why Grace adored him so completely. "Come on, then, let me show you where everything is." He led her through the kitchen, past the industrial stoves and prep tables that gleamed from their evening cleaning, to a small door tucked behind the walk-in freezer. The storeroom was exactly as advertised, cramped and filled with boxes of canned goods, paper products, and cleaning supplies. But in one corner, someone had set up a narrow cot with obvious care. Grace insisted on the purple sheets. Eli explained, looking slightly embarrassed as he gestured toward the cheerful bedding that stood out like a splash of joy against the utilitarian surroundings. Said, "They'd make it feel more like home." I tried to tell her you might prefer something more mature, but she was pretty determined about the color choice. Miranda's throat tightened with an emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm her completely. The sheets were clearly from a child's room, probably Grace's own bed, and the gesture hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had sacrificed their own comfort for hers? When had anyone cared enough to worry about whether she felt at home? "They're absolutely perfect," she managed, her voice cracking slightly on the words. After Eli bid her goodnight, promising to wake her before the morning rush if she wanted to help with breakfast prep, Miranda settled onto the surprisingly comfortable cot. The sheets smelled of lavender, fabric softener, and childhood innocence, and somewhere in the building's old pipes, water hummed a quiet lullaby that spoke of safety and belonging. The storeroom's single window looked out onto the alley, where streetlights created pools of golden illumination in the gathering darkness. For the first time in years, maybe decades, Miranda felt truly safe. Not the hollow security that money and power provided, but the deep, soul-level safety that came from being genuinely cared for by good people. She pulled the purple sheets up to her chin and let herself sink into the simple comfort of knowing that tomorrow she would wake up somewhere she was wanted. But as she drifted toward sleep, lulled by the building's gentle settling sounds and the distant hum of late-night traffic, a sharp buzzing cut through the peaceful quiet like a knife. Her corporate phone, hidden beneath the pile of thrift store clothes in her duffel bag, lit up the darkness with its harsh blue glow. The screen showed 17 missed calls from Clara, along with a cascade of increasingly frantic text messages. The most recent one blazed across the display in all capital letters. Board emergency. They're calling a vote. Call me now. Miranda stared at the glowing screen, her peaceful moment shattered by the violent intrusion of her other life. The phone continued to vibrate insistently in her trembling hands, each buzz a reminder of the billion-dollar empire she'd abandoned, the responsibilities she'd walked away from, the world that refused to let her go, even when she was desperate to disappear. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the Ohio sky, and the first drops of rain began to tap against the storeroom window like urgent fingers demanding attention. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when the first news van screeched to a halt outside Eli's diner. Within minutes, the quiet street transformed into a circus of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Their equipment cluttered the sidewalk where, just yesterday, Miranda had swept leaves away with a worn-down broom. Inside, Eli was brewing the morning's first pot of coffee when Grace tugged at his apron. "Daddy, why are there so many people outside?" Before he could answer, the diner's ancient TV crackled to life. The morning news anchor's voice cut through the peaceful quiet. Breaking news. Miranda Vail, CEO of Vail Technologies, has been found living as a homeless woman in small-town Ohio. The billionaire executive reportedly spent weeks working as a dishwasher. The coffee pot slipped from Eli's hand, shattering on the floor. Dark liquid pooled around his boots as he stared at the screen, where Miranda's corporate headshot appeared next to a grainy photo of Mandy, sweeping the diner's front step. "That's Miss Mandy." Grace pointed at the screen, her eyes wide with confusion. The bell above the door chimed frantically as reporters pushed their way inside. Microphones thrust forward like weapons. Camera flashes turned the homey diner into something alien and harsh. Eli instinctively pulled Grace behind him, shielding her from the chaos. "Mr. Brooks, how does it feel to learn you've been harboring a billionaire? Did you suspect Miranda Vail's true identity? Was this all a publicity stunt for Vail Technologies?" The questions came rapid fire, each one hitting Eli like a physical blow. His hands trembled as he gripped the counter for support. The world seemed to tilt sideways as memories replayed with cruel clarity. Every late-night conversation, every shared laugh, every moment he'd thought was genuine. Through the crowd, Miranda appeared in the doorway. She wore her usual worn jeans and faded sweater, but something had changed. She stood straighter, her presence somehow larger. The reporters parted for her like waves breaking against a rock. "Eli," she said softly, her voice carrying despite the circus around them. "I can explain." "Explain?" The word came out rough, scraping against his throat. "Explain how you made fools of us all? How you turned my diner into your social experiment?" "No, that's not." Miranda stepped forward, but Eli backed away. "You sat right there," he pointed to the corner booth, "and listened to me pour out my heart about Sarah's death, about our struggles. Was that entertaining for you?" The reporters fell silent, cameras rolling, feeding on their pain like vultures. Grace clutched her father's leg, tears welling in her eyes. "Please." Miranda's composure cracked. "It wasn't like that. Everything I shared with you was real. I came here looking for something I'd lost. My humanity, my faith in people. You showed me what true kindness looks like." "Kindness?" Eli laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Is that what you call lying to someone's face for weeks? Playing poor while your billions sat in the bank?" A local reporter thrust her microphone closer. Miss Vale, was this an undercover operation for your company's new social responsibility initiative? Miranda ignored the question, her eyes fixed on Eli. The money doesn't matter. What happened here was real. You taught me. Get out. Eli's voice was quiet but firm. Take your cameras and your billions and get out of my diner. Daddy, no! Grace broke free from his grip, running to Miranda. Miss Mandy can't leave. Miranda knelt down, her designer watch now visible beneath her sleeve. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have been honest with you both. You should go. Eli moved forward, gently pulling Grace back. We've given your audience enough entertainment for one day. Outside, a sleek black car had pulled up, looking absurdly out of place among the news vans. A man in a suit held the door open, waiting. Miranda straightened, squaring her shoulders like the CEO she was, but her eyes were red-rimmed as she looked at Eli one last time. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me what wealth really means. She walked out of the diner, cameras tracking her every move. Through the window, Eli watched as she slid into the waiting car, tears streaming down her face. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, taking with it the woman he'd thought he knew. The reporters began filing out, chasing their story. The bell chimed a final time as the last one left, leaving behind a silence that felt like grief. Eli stood at the window, one hand pressed against the cool glass. From the ancient radio behind the counter, a gospel tune played softly, something about forgiveness and second chances. But he wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. Grace's small voice broke through his thoughts. Daddy, is Miss Mandy ever coming back? He stared at the empty street where camera crews were packing up their gear, where just yesterday, Miranda, no Miss Vale, had helped him hang Christmas lights. No, honey, he said finally. I don't think she is. The morning sun cast long shadows across empty tables in Eli's diner. Where regulars once filled booths with friendly chatter, only silence remained. Eli wiped down the same spot on the counter for the 5th time, his movements mechanical, his eyes distant. 3 days had passed since the media circus, but the aftermath lingered like a bad taste. Another slow morning? Marcy's familiar voice broke through his thoughts as she settled onto her usual stool at the counter. 3rd one this week. Eli tossed the rag aside and reached for the coffee pot. Seems folks don't want their breakfast with a side of scandal. The local newspaper lay folded on the counter, Miranda Vale's corporate photo staring up at them. The headline read, Small-town diner at center of billionaire social experiment. Grace sat in her usual corner booth, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. Her shoulders drooped, and her usual morning chatter was absent. Daddy, she called out softly, do you think Miss Mandy misses us too? Eli's hand tightened around the coffee pot. The question hung in the air, heavy with hurt and hope. He couldn't find the words to answer. Marcy watched the exchange with knowing eyes. You know, Eli, she said, keeping her voice low, holding on to anger, is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. This isn't about anger, Marcy. Eli busied himself organizing menus that didn't need organizing. It's about trust. She made us look like fools. Did she? Marcy challenged gently. Or did she show the world something beautiful about this place? About you? Before Eli could respond, the bell above the door chimed. A single customer walked in, old Mr. Peterson from the hardware store. He settled into a booth, carefully avoiding eye contact. Meanwhile, in a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper, Miranda Vale stood before her board of directors. The boardroom's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but she felt suffocated. Stern faces lined both sides of the polished table, their disapproval palpable. Miss Vale. Board Chairman Richard Holbrook's voice dripped with disdain. Your little adventure has cost this company millions in market value. Investors are questioning your judgment. Miranda straightened her spine, smoothing her designer suit, armor so different from the worn jeans she'd grown comfortable in at the diner. What I learned in Riverbend is invaluable, she countered. We've lost sight of what matters. Real people, real struggles, real kindness. Kindness doesn't pay dividends, sneered Thomas Wright, head of operations. We're not a charity. Miranda pulled up a presentation on the wall screen. Actually, it does. Studies show companies with strong social responsibility programs see increased customer loyalty and employee satisfaction. I'm proposing a kindness-first initiative. The board shifted uncomfortably as she outlined her vision, a program supporting small businesses, especially those run by veterans and single parents. Her voice grew stronger as she described Eli's diner, careful not to mention him by name. This man served meals to hungry people who couldn't pay while barely keeping his own lights on. That's the kind of leadership we should embrace. Leadership? Holbrook scoffed. It sounds like poor business sense. No, Miranda's voice cut through the mahogany-lined room. It's the purest form of wealth, the kind that enriches both sides of the transaction. Back in Riverbend, the lunch rush came and went, though rush was generous. Only 3 tables had been filled. Eli watched Grace collecting salt shakers from empty booths, her movements lacking their usual bounce. "Daddy?" she asked, clutching a shaker to her chest. "Will Miss Mandy ever come back?" The question pierced his heart. He remembered Miranda. No miss. Vale, teaching Grace how to fold napkins into swans, both of them giggling like it was the most important task in the world. The memory stung. "Grace, honey." He started, but couldn't finish. Marcy, who had stayed to help with lunch, touched his arm. "The good book says bitterness is like a root that grows up to cause trouble. Don't let it take hold, Eli." "I'm not bitter," he protested. "I'm hurt," Marcy finished. "And that's natural, but don't let that hurt blind you to the truth, which is that sometimes people can surprise you, that maybe her mask wasn't the poor woman who walked in here. Maybe it was the corporate CEO she wore before." The afternoon dragged on, with more empty tables and quiet moments. By 5 o'clock, with no customers in sight, Eli decided to close early. He found Grace asleep in her favorite booth, her coloring book open to a half-finished picture of a princess. Gathering her in his arms, he felt her small hands automatically wrap around his neck, trusting and innocent. Her breath was warm against his shoulders. He carried her toward the door. "We'll be all right, Pumpkin," he whispered, though uncertainty gnawed at his gut. Above them, the diner's sign flickered weakly in the gathering dusk, casting intermittent shadows across his daughter's peaceful face. Miranda Vale stood before the board of directors in her usual power suit, but something was different about her demeanor. Gone was the sleek corporate mask she'd worn for years. Instead, her eyes held a gentle determination as she clicked through slides on the presentation screen. "Project Grace," she announced, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "a nationwide initiative to support small-town diners owned by veterans and single parents." The words appeared in bold letters behind her as murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Director Thompson cleared his throat. "Miss Vale, with all due respect, we're still dealing with the PR fallout from your rural experiment." He adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable. "The shareholders?" "The shareholders?" Miranda interrupted softly. "We'll see the value in this." She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics about veteran-owned businesses and struggling single-parent entrepreneurs. "What I learned in Riverbend wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a wake-up call." The board members exchanged glances. Some looked skeptical, others curious. Miranda continued, her passion growing with each word. "We have the resources to make a real difference. Small-town diners aren't just businesses, they're the heart of their communities." Director Chen leaned forward. "And the projected cost of this heart?" Miranda presented the budget breakdown. "A pilot program targeting 50 locations initially. We provide renovation grants, equipment upgrades, and marketing support." She paused, then added, "The total investment is less than what we spent on our last holiday party." The room grew quiet. Miranda could feel the shift in energy as the numbers spoke for themselves. Director Thompson studied the projections with grudging interest. "Why call it Project Grace?" asked Sarah Winters, the newest board member. Miranda's expression softened. "Because sometimes grace is what we need most when we've lost our way." She didn't mention the little girl who'd shown her more wisdom than any corporate advisor ever had. After 2 hours of debate and modifications, the board agreed to a 3-month pilot program. Miranda sat in her office afterward, staring at her computer screen. She'd typed and deleted the same email 5 times. "Dear Eli, I want to tell you about a project that could help the diner. No strings attached, no publicity requirements, just help for someone who deserves it. Please, let me explain." Miranda, her finger hovered over the send button. With a deep breath, she clicked it, knowing the chances of a response were slim. Days passed. The email remained unanswered. Miranda threw herself into launching Project Grace, reviewing applications from other towns, other diners. But her thoughts kept drifting back to Riverbend. One evening, her assistant brought in a plain white envelope with childish handwriting. Inside was a letter written in different colored crayons, complete with small hearts drawn in the margins. "Dear Miss Mandy, Miranda, I miss you. The diner isn't the same without you. Daddy doesn't smile as much anymore, but I see him looking at your picture in the newspaper sometimes. He prays for you at bedtime, even if he says he doesn't. I know because I peek through the door and hear him. Please come back. God gives second chances. That's what Daddy always tells me. Love, Grace P.S. I drew you a picture of us at the diner. See the hearts? That means we're family. Miranda sat in her darkened office, the city lights twinkling beyond her window. Tears fell onto Grace's crayon letter, smudging the carefully drawn hearts. The child's innocent words cut through all her corporate armor, reaching the part of her that had come alive in that small-town diner. She touched the crayon, drawing 3 stick figures behind a counter, surrounded by hearts. In Grace's simple art, there was no billionaire CEO, no scandal, no betrayal, just family. Miranda reached for her phone and called her assistant. "Cancel my meetings for tomorrow," she said, quietly. "I'm going to Riverbend." The crayon letter lay on her desk, its message clear and pure in the dim light. Sometimes the wisest words came from the smallest hearts. The morning sun cast long shadows across Eli's diner as Miranda's modest sedan pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. Gone were her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Instead, she wore simple jeans and a plain sweater, her hair tucked behind her ears without fuss. Through the windshield, she spotted Eli balanced precariously on a stepladder, tools in hand as he worked on the flickering neon sign. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped out of the car. The crunch of gravel under her feet seemed deafening in the quiet morning air. Eli glanced down, his expression shifting from concentration to guarded recognition. "Morning," she said softly, stopping a respectful distance from the ladder. Eli's jaw tightened. He turned back to the sign, adjusting a wire with practiced fingers. "Didn't expect to see you here again." "I know." Miranda clasped her hands together, fighting the urge to fidget. "I wanted to talk to you, if you have a minute." He continued working for a moment, then sighed and climbed down the ladder. Keeping it between them like a barrier, he crossed his arms. "Talk about what? How you use my diner for your social experiment?" "That's not what it was," Miranda said, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "I came to apologize and to explain." Before Eli could respond, the diner's door burst open. Grace flew out like a tiny whirlwind, her braids bouncing. "Miss Mandy!" she cried, launching herself at Miranda. Miranda caught her, wrapping her arms around the little girl as tears pricked at her eyes. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "I knew you'd come back. I prayed every night." Grace beamed up at her, then turned to her father. "Daddy? Look who's here!" Eli's stern expression softened slightly at his daughter's joy, but wariness still lingered in his eyes. "Grace, honey, go check if Marcy needs help setting up for breakfast." Grace pouted but obeyed, giving Miranda one last squeeze before skipping inside. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken words. "I'm funding a program," Miranda said finally, "for diners like yours, run by veterans and single parents, places that feed the soul as much as the body." Eli's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's quite a change from running tech companies." "You changed me," she admitted. "The kindness you showed me, even when you thought I had nothing, it woke something up inside me that I'd forgotten." She took a deep breath. "I know I hurt you by not being honest, but everything else was real. The conversations we had, the lessons I learned, the friendship we shared." "Friendship requires trust," Eli said quietly. Miranda nodded, accepting the rebuke. "I know, and I broke that trust. She gestured helplessly. "I want to make it right, not with money or programs, but with time and truth." The morning breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of coffee from inside the diner. Eli studied her face for a long moment, then picked up his toolbox. "We're short-handed this morning," he said finally. "If you remember how to work the griddle, we could use the help." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Miranda followed him inside, where Grace was arranging silverware with meticulous care. The familiar warmth of the kitchen wrapped around her as she tied on an apron. "The pancake batter's in the fridge," Eli said, his tone professional but not unkind. "Standard breakfast rush starts in 20 minutes. Miranda nodded, falling easily into the routine she'd learned during her time there. She mixed fresh batter, heated the griddle, and checked the coffee makers. Grace flitted between them, chattering about school and her new art projects. As the morning progressed, locals trickled in. Some whispered and stared when they recognized Miranda, but most simply nodded and ordered their usual breakfast. The rhythm of cooking and serving gradually eased the tension, like a gentle tide wearing down sharp edges. By dinner time, the awkwardness had faded enough for brief moments of normalcy. Grace's laughter rang out as she helped Miranda carry plates, and even Eli cracked a small smile when she remembered exactly how he liked the hash browns arranged. The evening crowd was small but steady. An elderly couple who'd been coming to the diner for decades shared stories about the town's history. A young mother with 3 kids blessed their meal with a prayer that made Grace beam. A truck driver passing through told jokes that had everyone groaning. Slowly, tentatively, like the first notes of a forgotten song, laughter began to fill the diner again. It wasn't the same as before. There were still careful pauses and guarded glances, but it was real. Grace darted between tables with dessert menus, her joy infectious. Miranda caught Eli, watching her with their daughter, his expression thoughtful. As they served the last few customers, the familiar dance of plates and coffee cups felt almost like old times. The sunset painted the diner's windows in warm gold, and somewhere in the kitchen, the radio played softly, its melody weaving through the gentle murmur of conversation. The next few days settled into a gentle rhythm at Eli's diner. Miranda arrived each morning just before sunrise, helping Eli prep for the breakfast rush while Grace sleepily colored at her usual corner booth. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon filled the air as sunlight gradually brightened the worn linoleum floors. During quiet moments between customers, Miranda would slip into the storeroom, transformed now into a makeshift office. Her laptop balanced on boxes of napkins and paper plates as she conducted video meetings with her corporate team. Her voice carried softly through the thin walls, discussing budgets and initiatives, while out front, Eli served up plates of eggs and hash browns. "Your quarterly projections look promising," her CFO's voice crackled through the laptop speakers one morning. "But the board wants concrete results from this small business initiative." "They'll have them," Miranda assured him, glancing through the doorway where she could see Eli showing Grace how to properly fold napkins. "Trust me on this." As days passed, the tension between Miranda and Eli began to thaw. It started with small things, shared smiles over Grace's endless stories, synchronized movements as they navigated the narrow kitchen space, quiet thank yous when passing plates or refilling coffee pots. One particularly busy morning, they found themselves working in perfect harmony. Eli called out orders while Miranda plated them, their timing as natural as if they'd been doing this for years. When the rush finally ended, Eli touched her shoulder briefly. "You're getting pretty good at this," he said softly. "I had a good teacher," she replied, and the warmth in his eyes told her another brick in the wall between them had fallen. Grace, meanwhile, had appointed herself as their unofficial matchmaker. Her attempts at subtle manipulation were endearingly obvious, from accidentally seating them next to each other during break time to creating elaborate reasons why Miranda should stay late after closing. "Daddy," Grace announced one afternoon, hands on her hips in perfect 8-year-old seriousness, "Miranda needs to try your special pancakes, the ones you only make on Sundays." "Does she now?" Eli raised an eyebrow, amused. "Yes," Grace nodded firmly. "And maybe she should come to church with us too, so she can try them after service." Miranda caught Eli's eye, and they both struggled not to laugh at Grace's transparent scheming. "We'll see, pumpkin," Eli said, ruffling his daughter's hair. Late one evening, after Grace had fallen asleep in her booth doing homework, Miranda found Eli standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall. His hands gripped the edge of the sink so tightly, his knuckles were white. "Eli?" She approached carefully, recognizing the distant look in his eyes. She'd seen it before in veterans she'd worked with through her company's hiring programs. He startled slightly, then relaxed when he saw her. "Sorry," he mumbled. Sometimes the noise of the dishes clattering, it takes me back there." Miranda waited quietly, giving him space to continue if he wanted to. "Afghanistan," he said finally. "We were in a marketplace when the IED went off. The sound of breaking plates, sometimes it sounds like." He trailed off, shaking his head. Without thinking, Miranda reached out and placed her hand over his, where it still gripped the sink. "How do you handle it?" she asked softly. "Prayer helps," he admitted. "And grace. She keeps me anchored in the present." He turned his hand over, briefly squeezing hers before letting go. Having the diner helps, too. Giving people a place where they feel safe, welcome. It matters. The following afternoon, during a slow period, Eli shared more. They sat at the counter while Grace napped in her booth, warm sunlight streaming through the windows. "I've always dreamed of doing more with this place," he said, gesturing around the diner. Not just serving meals, but really serving the community. A proper kitchen where we could feed anyone who needs it. Maybe teach cooking classes for kids, host support groups for vets. His eyes lit up as he spoke, showing glimpses of the passionate man beneath his quiet exterior. The kind of place where everyone feels like family. Why haven't you? Miranda asked gently. Eli's smile turned rueful. Money, time, fear of failing maybe. He shrugged. It's just a dream. That evening, after the last customer had left and Grace had gone upstairs to bed, Miranda and Eli sat at the counter, sharing the last slice of apple pie. The diner was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Miranda took a small bite of pie, gathering her courage. Maybe we can make that dream real, she whispered. Eli looked at her, and for the first time since her return, she saw hope flickering in his eyes. He smiled faintly, and the warmth of it reached all the way to her heart. The morning sun cast long shadows across the diner's counter as Miranda paced nervously, her usually confident demeanor replaced with hesitation. She watched Eli wipe down tables, gathering her courage before approaching him. Eli, I have something to ask you, she said, fiddling with her coffee cup. The company is hosting a major fundraising dinner next week in New York. Would you consider catering it? Eli paused mid-wipe, his cloth hovering over the formica surface. Me? Cater? A fancy corporate dinner? His eyebrows rose in disbelief. Miranda, I make simple diner food. Your folks probably expect caviar and whatever else rich people eat. That's exactly why I want you, Miranda insisted, leaning against the counter. Your food has heart. It's real. And this dinner is about supporting veterans' community kitchens across the country. Who better to showcase that than you? Grace looked up from her math homework, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Can we go to New York, Daddy? Please? I've never seen buildings that touch the sky. Eli ran a hand through his hair, his expression uncertain. I don't know, sweetheart. That's a whole different world up there. But you always tell me being different is what makes people special, Grace reminded him, sliding off her chair to hug his waist. And your meatloaf is the most special ever. Miranda couldn't help but smile at Grace's earnest lobbying. She's right, you know. Besides, the guests would love to meet the inspiration behind the Veterans Kitchen Initiative. Eli's face softened as he looked down at his daughter's hopeful expression. You really think my cooking would work at something like this? I know it will, Miranda said firmly. Simple, honest food, made with love. That's what this event is all about. Showing that real change starts at places like your diner. After a long moment, Eli nodded slowly. All right, but only if Grace can come too. She's my best sous chef, after all. The next week found them stepping out of a sleek black car in Manhattan. Grace pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide as saucers at the towering buildings surrounding them. Daddy, look, they're like mountains made of windows, she exclaimed, pointing at every skyscraper they passed. The corporate kitchen staff welcomed them warmly, clearly briefed by Miranda to treat them as honored guests. Eli quickly found his rhythm, directing the preparation of his signature dishes, while Grace proudly helped arrange garnishes. As evening approached, Miranda appeared in an elegant blue dress, looking every inch the CEO, but with a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before her time at the diner. How are you holding up? She asked Eli, who was putting finishing touches on his famous meatloaf. Surprisingly okay, he admitted, adjusting his borrowed chef's jacket, though I keep expecting someone to realize I don't belong here. You belong exactly where you are, Miranda assured him. Trust me, the dinner exceeded everyone's expectations. Corporate executives and wealthy donors alike praised the homestyle cooking, many sharing stories of their own favorite diners and family restaurants. Eli found himself drawn into conversations about his military service and his dreams for the diner. His natural humility and genuine passion winning over even the most skeptical guests. News cameras captured the event, reporters eagerly covering the heartwarming collaboration between a small-town diner owner and a Fortune 500 CEO. The headlines would read, Wall Street meets Main Street, and From Small Town to Big Apple, a recipe for change. As the evening wound down, soft music drifted up to the rooftop terrace, where a few guests still mingled. The New York skyline sparkled around them like a galaxy of earthbound stars. Grace had fallen asleep on a cushioned bench, watched over by Miranda's assistant. Miranda found Eli standing at the railing, gazing out at the city lights. Penny for your thoughts? She asked, joining him. Just thinking about how strange life is, he replied. A few months ago, I was worried about keeping the lights on. Now I'm cooking for billionaires in New York City. And how does it feel? Surprisingly normal, he chuckled. Maybe because you helped me see that people are just people, no matter how much money they have. The band below started playing a slower song, its melody floating up through the night air. Miranda held out her hand. Dance with me? Eli hesitated for just a moment before taking it. Fair warning, I'm not exactly Fred Astaire. That's okay, Miranda smiled. I'm not Ginger Rogers. They swayed together under the stars, the city lights twinkling around them like fireflies. The tension of the past months seemed to melt away with each step, replaced by something new and fragile and hopeful. Thank you, Eli said softly, not just for tonight, but for believing in the diner, in me. Thank you for teaching me what really matters, Miranda replied, her head resting lightly on his shoulder as they danced. The night was perfect, the kind that feels like a dream but better because it's real. The food had been a triumph, the cause was noble, and two people who had once been worlds apart now moved in perfect harmony beneath the Manhattan sky. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Miranda's Manhattan penthouse. Eli stood at the sleek kitchen counter, flipping pancakes while Grace sat perched on a bar stool, swinging her legs and humming. The griddle sizzled as he poured batter into the shape of Mickey Mouse ears, just the way Grace liked them. These smell amazing, Daddy, Grace chirped, inhaling deeply. Just like we make back home. Eli smiled, sliding the plate toward her. The previous night's success at the fundraising dinner still warmed his heart. Maybe things really were looking up. Miranda had stepped out for an early morning meeting, promising to return with bagels from her favorite deli. The massive TV mounted on the wall played quietly in the background, morning news scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Suddenly, the news anchor's voice cut through their peaceful breakfast. Breaking news in the business world, shocking revelations about tech CEO Miranda Vale's recent homeless experiment have surfaced. Eli's hand froze mid-flip as footage appeared on the screen. It was security camera video from the diner, showing Miranda writing in her notebook late at night, making phone calls when she thought no one was watching. According to documents leaked by Vale Technologies executive James Morton, the CEO's much-publicized stint as a homeless woman was actually a carefully orchestrated publicity stunt, the anchor continued. Internal emails suggest the company planned to use the experience to launch their new Kindness First initiative, targeting positive press and market expansion. The pancake on the griddle began to smoke. Eli quickly turned off the heat, his hands trembling slightly. Daddy? Grace's voice quavered. That's not true about Miss Miranda, is it? More footage played across the screen, Miranda in board meetings months before, discussing image rehabilitation and corporate social responsibility initiatives. The dates showed these meetings happened before she ever came to their diner. Eli's throat tightened. The timing couldn't be coincidental. His phone buzzed with text messages from people back home. Are you watching the news? Did you know about this? The local news stations were already picking up the story. The TV switched to a live feed of an emergency Vale Technologies board meeting. Shareholders voiced their outrage, calling the stunt manipulative and exploitative. This company's reputation is in tatters, one board member declared. Miss Vale's reckless publicity scheme has backfired spectacularly. Grace pushed her half-eaten pancakes away. Her earlier joy vanished. Why are they saying mean things about Miranda? Eli couldn't answer. His mind raced through every interaction, every late-night conversation, every moment he thought was genuine. Had it all been calculated? Had she been taking notes about them, planning how to use their story? The elevator dinged, and Miranda burst in, her face pale. Eli, I can explain. Were we just research subjects? His voice was quiet but sharp. Your perfect case study in small-town kindness? No, that's not. Miranda stepped forward, but Eli was already gathering Grace's things. I trusted you. Twice. He helped Grace into her coat, his movements mechanical. I should have known better than to think someone like you would actually care about people like us. Please, listen to me, Miranda pleaded. Those emails are being taken out of context. The board meetings they're showing, I don't want to hear it. Eli cut her off, taking Grace's hand. I've got a diner to run. A real one, not a PR opportunity. Grace looked between them, tears welling in her eyes. Daddy, can't we stay? Miranda didn't do anything bad, did she? The hurt in his daughter's voice only strengthened his resolve to leave. He couldn't let Grace be disappointed again. Come on, sweetheart. We're going home. Miranda's assistant burst through the door, phone in hand. Miranda, the board is voting in 10 minutes. They're moving to remove you as CEO. Eli paused at the elevator, Grace's small hand in his. For a moment, he thought he saw real pain in Miranda's eyes. Not just concern for her career, but he couldn't trust that anymore. "Good luck with your company," he said, flatly as the elevator doors opened. "I hope it was worth it." The last thing he saw as the doors closed was Miranda standing alone in her vast apartment, one hand reaching out as if to stop them, her assistant frantically trying to get her attention about the impending board vote. Grace pressed her face into his side as they descended. "Daddy, will we ever see Miranda again?" Eli stroked her hair, his heart heavy. "I don't know, Pumpkin? I just don't know." Up in the penthouse, Miranda watched through the window as Eli's rental car pulled away from the building. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications about the emergency board meeting, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the disappearing vehicle. "Miranda," her assistant said urgently, "they're about to start the vote. We need to get you on this call right now." Miranda stood frozen, one hand pressed against the cold glass, watching the last person who had truly believed in her drive away. The morning sun caught the tears on her cheeks, turning them to gold. Miranda stood before the board of directors, her posture straight, but her heart heavy. The mahogany conference table stretched before her like a gulf between two worlds. Afternoon light filtered through the glass walls of the high-rise boardroom, casting long shadows across the plush carpet. "Before you proceed with the vote," Miranda said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "I'd like to make a statement." The board members exchanged glances. Some were expressions of triumph, others of uncertainty. Chairman Roberts adjusted his tie and nodded. "The floor is yours, Miss Vale." Miranda took a deep breath, remembering the warmth of Eli's diner, the sound of Grace's laughter, the simple beauty of serving others. "I'm resigning as CEO, effective immediately." Murmurs rippled through the room. She held up her hand for silence. "Furthermore, I'm selling my controlling shares in the company." She placed a folder on the table. "My legal team has already prepared the necessary documentation." "Miranda, Clara," her assistant, whispered from the corner, "You don't have to do this." But Miranda continued, her voice growing stronger. "The profits from the sale will fund a new private initiative supporting small businesses in rural communities." She allowed herself a small smile. "You won't have to worry about my idealistic nonsense anymore." Chairman Roberts leaned forward. "This is rather dramatic, even for you. The board might be willing to consider—" "No." Miranda's tone was firm. "I've learned something these past weeks. True wealth isn't measured in stock prices or quarterly reports. It's measured in the kindness we show others." She gathered her belongings while the board sat in stunned silence. Outside the boardroom, reporters crowded the lobby. Headlines flashed across screens. Tech CEO steps down amid scandal. Veils fall from grace. Corporate compassion experiment backfires. Miranda walked through the chaos with her head high. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. Back in Riverbend, Eli wiped down the counter for the third time that hour. The radio played an old country song about lost love, and he couldn't bring himself to change the station. Every corner of the diner held memories of Miranda or Mandy, as he'd known her. The coffee maker gurgled, reminding him of their late-night conversations. The booth by the window where she'd first sat still seemed to hold her shadow. "Order up," he called, more out of habit than necessity. The diner was nearly empty. A regular customer, old Joe, nursed his coffee. "Saw the news about that CEO lady," he said carefully. "Quite a story." Eli just nodded, focusing on arranging sugar packets that didn't need arranging. At home that evening, he tucked Grace into bed. She clutched her worn teddy bear, her eyes serious in the soft glow of her nightlight. "Time for prayers, Pumpkin," Eli said, kneeling beside her bed. Grace folded her hands. "Dear God, thank you for Daddy and our diner and my teachers." She paused, then added softly, "And please help Miss Miranda's heart. She looks sad on TV. Amen." Eli's throat tightened. "Amen," he whispered. In New York, Miranda packed the last of her personal items into a box. Her penthouse felt cold and sterile after the warmth of Riverbend. She'd already arranged for most of her furniture to be donated to veterans' housing programs. Clara stood in the doorway, clutching a tablet. "The media is having a field day. Should I prepare a statement?" "No need." Miranda touched the small cross necklace Grace had given her. "Let them say what they want." She walked through each room one last time. The kitchen where she'd watched Eli make breakfast that morning seemed to mock her with its emptiness. The living room where Grace had excitedly pointed out city lights now felt hollow. From her window, she could see the whole city spread out below, a glittering carpet of lights and possibilities. One by one, she switched off the lights in her penthouse. Each click echoed like the closing of a chapter. The last light cast her shadow against the wall. For a moment, she stood there, remembering the woman who had lived here, ambitious, lonely, searching for something she couldn't name. That woman was gone now, transformed by simple acts of kindness in a small-town diner. She reached for the final switch. In the darkness, the city lights twinkled like stars, reminding her of nights spent talking with Eli on the bench outside his diner. With a soft click, the last light went out. The penthouse fell into darkness, but somewhere in Miranda's heart, a different kind of light had begun to shine. The autumn morning brought a crisp breeze through Riverbend streets, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. Eli finished wiping down the last table after the breakfast rush at the diner, his movements automatic after years of practice. The morning had been busier than usual, a small blessing he never took for granted. He'd just sent old Mr. Peterson on his way with a thermos of coffee and a paper bag containing 2 blueberry muffins when his phone buzzed against the worn Formica counter. Marcy Townsend's name lit up the cracked screen, and he could hear the excitement in her voice before he even answered. "Eli, have you seen the flyers around town?" Marcy's words tumbled over each other in her enthusiasm. "There's this new place opening up Grace's Table. It's some kind of community kitchen for veterans and single parents. Free meals, support services, job training, the works. Can you believe it? Right here in Riverbend." Eli balanced the phone between his ear and shoulder while stacking the mismatched plates that had served his customers for the better part of a decade. Some had chips along the edges, others bore the faint stains of countless meals, but they were clean and they did their job. "Haven't heard about it, Marcy. Been pretty busy here trying to keep the doors open." "Well, they're having their grand opening today at noon. That old brick building on 5th Street? You know, the one that's been empty since Henderson's Hardware closed down 3 years ago? They've completely renovated it from top to bottom." Marcy paused, and he could picture her adjusting her reading glasses the way she did when she was trying to remember details. "You should come, Eli. Might do you good to get out of that diner for a spell. When's the last time you took a break that wasn't forced on you?" He glanced around the half-empty diner, taking in the familiar sights that had become both comfort and burden. The morning sun streamed through windows that could use a good cleaning, catching the dust motes dancing in the air and highlighting the worn spots on the linoleum floor where countless feet had walked the same paths. The red vinyl booth seats showed their age, with small tears carefully patched with matching tape, and the old cash register, the same one his predecessor had used, sat silent and patient. "I've got the lunch shift to prepare for," he said, already mentally calculating how many burger patties to thaw and whether he had enough soup for the day. "Can't just leave when people might need a meal." "The diner will survive without you for 1 hour, Eli Brooks," Marcy insisted, with the firm tone she used when organizing church committees. "Besides, from what I read on the flyer, they're specifically reaching out to veterans. Could be good connections for you. Maybe some of those folks will find their way to your place too." After hanging up, Eli found himself staring at the phone for a long moment. Marcy meant well, she always did, but the idea of visiting another establishment that served food felt strange. Competition, maybe, though he didn't like thinking of it that way. Still, his curiosity had been piqued, and he'd learned over the years that when Marcy Townsend got excited about something, it was usually worth paying attention to. He stepped outside into the cool morning air and found one of the flyers taped to the lamppost just outside his door. The paper was thick and professionally printed, not the kind of thing most local businesses could afford. The logo showed a simple wooden table with chairs gathered around it, drawn in warm earth tones. Beneath it, in elegant but readable script, were the words, "Grace's Table, where everyone belongs." Something about the name tugged at his memory, like a half-remembered song or the face of someone you'd met in passing. Grace, his daughter's name, his wife's middle name, the theological concept that had sustained him through the darkest valleys of his life. But he pushed the thought away, telling himself it had to be coincidence. Grace was a common enough name, after all. By 11:30, he'd convinced his part-time waitress, Sandy, to cover the counter for an hour. She was a good kid, a nursing student at the community college who worked shifts to help pay for textbooks, and she knew the routine well enough to handle the lunch crowd if it materialized. The walk to 5th Street took him through the heart of downtown Riverbend, past storefronts that told the story of a small town fighting to stay relevant in a changing world. The old brick building had indeed transformed. What had once been a tired, empty shell with boarded windows and peeling paint now stood proud and welcoming. Fresh navy blue paint brightened its walls, and new windows gleamed in the autumn sunlight like friendly eyes. A hand-painted sign hung above the entrance, the same logo from the flyer rendered in cheerful colors that seemed to invite everyone who passed by. A crowd had already gathered on the sidewalk, maybe 50 or 60 people, which was substantial for Riverbend. Eli recognized most of the faces: Mrs. Chin from the flower shop, the Wilson family who attended his church, several veterans he knew from the VFW hall. There was an energy in the air, a sense of anticipation and hope that small towns didn't often experience. As he approached, Eli noticed the volunteers scattered throughout the crowd. They wore navy blue t-shirts with "Kindness First" printed across the back in simple white letters. The phrase hit him like a gentle blow to the chest, stirring memories he'd tried to keep buried. His heart skipped a beat, but he told himself it was just another coincidence. Corporate buzzwords, that's all it was. The doors opened promptly at noon, and people began filing inside with the patient courtesy that characterized small-town gatherings. Eli hung back, observing from his position near an old oak tree whose branches had begun to turn gold and crimson. He'd always been more comfortable watching than participating, more at ease serving others than being served himself. The interior transformation visible through the open doors was nothing short of remarkable. What had once been a cluttered hardware store with narrow aisles and dim lighting had become an open, airy space, filled with warmth and possibility. Soft lighting cast everything in a golden glow, and comfortable seating arrangements invited conversation and lingering. A state-of-the-art kitchen was visible through a large serving window, its stainless steel surfaces gleaming and ready for service. Round tables filled the main dining area, each dressed with crisp white tablecloths and adorned with fresh flowers arranged in simple mason jars, sunflowers, and autumn mums that looked like they'd been picked from someone's garden rather than ordered from a florist. The whole place felt like an extension of someone's home, somewhere you'd be invited to sit down and stay a while. Veterans wearing their service caps mingled with young mothers holding children's hands, their faces bright with curiosity and hope. Elderly couples sat beside college students, and teenagers helped carry plates for seniors who moved slowly with walkers and canes. The atmosphere hummed with conversation and gentle laughter, the kind of sound Eli remembered from church suppers when he was growing up. A microphone squealed softly, drawing everyone's attention to the front of the room. The crowd quieted with the natural courtesy of people raised in small communities, and Eli found himself holding his breath without quite knowing why. "Thank you all for coming today." A familiar voice rang out, clear and warm and filled with an emotion that made Eli's chest tighten. He froze in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame so tightly his knuckles went white. Miranda stood at the front of the room, but this wasn't the polished CEO he'd seen in New York, or the desperate woman who'd appeared on his doorstep months ago. This was someone else entirely, someone who looked more like the Mandy who had washed dishes in his kitchen and shared coffee with him in the quiet hours before dawn. She was dressed simply in well-worn jeans and one of the Navy volunteer shirts, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, secured with what looked like a rubber band rather than an expensive accessory. She wore no makeup that he could see, and her face held a peace and purpose that took his breath away. "Grace's table?" she continued, her voice carrying easily through the space without seeming forced or rehearsed, "began as a dream born in a small diner right here in Riverbend, a place where kindness wasn't just a word printed on a corporate mission statement, but a way of life, lived out one meal, one conversation, one act of service at a time." Her eyes scanned the crowd as she spoke, and Eli could see tears glistening at the corners. A place where a simple meal could restore dignity, where everyone was treated like family, and where the only payment required was the promise to pass that kindness forward. She stepped down from the small platform and moved among the tables now, stopping to shake hands with veterans and chat with mothers who balanced babies on their hips. Her movements were natural, unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world for each person she encountered. "Every person who comes through these doors will be served with respect and love," she said, her voice now conversational rather than ceremonial. "No questions asked, no payment required, no forms to fill out or hoops to jump through. Just as someone once did for me when I had nothing and nowhere else to turn." Eli watched, transfixed, as she rolled up her sleeves and stepped behind the serving counter. The gesture was so familiar, so perfectly natural, that for a moment he was transported back to his own kitchen, where she'd done the same thing countless times. She lifted a ladle and began serving soup alongside other volunteers, her smile genuine and radiant as she talked with each person who came through the line. An elderly veteran approached the counter, his back bent with age and his hand shaking slightly as he held his tray. Miranda served him with the same care Eli had seen her show Grace, making sure his bowl was full and his bread warm, asking about his service and listening to his answer with complete attention. When a young mother with 3 small children struggled to manage trays and little hands, Miranda came around the counter to help carry their food to a table, kneeling down to speak to the children at their eye level. The scene before him blurred slightly, and Eli realized his eyes had welled up with tears he hadn't felt coming. He stood rooted to the spot, one hand still gripping the doorframe as if it were the only thing keeping him upright, watching Miranda serve food to veterans and families with a grace and humility that was both completely familiar and utterly transformed. This was the woman who had washed dishes in his kitchen, but it was also someone new, someone who had found her way home to herself through acts of service that required no cameras, no press releases, no board meetings to justify them. Eli stood in the doorway of Grace's table, his heart pounding as he watched Miranda serve food to a line of veterans. She wore a simple blue apron over jeans and a white shirt, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, so different from the corporate power suits he'd seen in the news. The afternoon sunlight streamed through large windows, casting a warm glow over the renovated space that had once been an abandoned warehouse. His feet felt heavy as he made his way through the crowd. Some of the veterans nodded at him in recognition, regular customers from his diner. Miranda hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on ladling out hot soup and exchanging gentle words with each person she served. "The soup's great, ma'am," said an elderly veteran in a worn army cap. "Thank you, sir," Miranda replied with genuine warmth. "Please come back tomorrow. We're here every day." When she finally looked up and saw Eli, her ladle froze mid-air. Their eyes met, crossed the serving counter, and the bustling noise of the kitchen seemed to fade away. She recovered quickly, handing the ladle to a volunteer beside her. "Would you like to talk?" she asked softly, already untying her apron. Eli nodded stiffly, following her as she led the way through swinging doors into the industrial kitchen. Stainless steel appliances gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. It reminded him of his own kitchen, but on a much larger scale. Miranda stopped near a prep table, turning to face him. Her hands fidgeted with the apron she'd removed, betraying her nervousness despite her composed expression. "You didn't tell me you were doing this," Eli said, his voice rough with emotion. "I wasn't sure you'd want to know." Miranda set the apron down, after everything that happened. "So you just bought a building in my town without saying anything?" "I didn't buy it," she corrected gently. "I donated the funds to a nonprofit foundation. They run it independently. I'm just a volunteer here, like everyone else." Eli ran a hand through his hair, struggling with conflicting feelings. "And your company?" "The board? I sold my shares," Miranda said simply. "All of them. The money funded 30 kitchens like this across the country, with more planned." She gestured at the space around them. No corporate logos, no press releases, no publicity stunts, just people helping people. "Why here?" Eli asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Miranda's eyes softened. "Because this is where I learned what real kindness looks like. Not the kind that makes headlines or impresses shareholders, but the quiet kind that changes hearts." She paused, swallowing hard. "The kind you showed me that first day, when I was just a stranger who couldn't pay for coffee." Eli's chest tightened at the memory. He remembered her exhausted face, the way she'd tried to maintain dignity despite her apparent desperation. Even knowing now that it had been a disguise, he couldn't deny the genuine transformation he'd witnessed in her during those weeks. "I meant everything I said back then," Miranda continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every conversation we had, every moment with Grace, it was real. The only lie was my circumstances, not my heart." A cook passed by with a tray of fresh rolls, and they both stepped aside to let him through. The familiar rhythm of kitchen work surrounded them. Chopping, sizzling, the clatter of pots and pans. "I don't want your forgiveness if I haven't earned it," Miranda said after a moment, "but I want you to know that everything I'm doing now, I learned from you. You showed me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts or boardrooms, it's in how we treat each other." Eli looked around the kitchen again, taking in the volunteers preparing meals, the orderly systems in place, the sense of purpose that filled the space. It was everything he dreamed of doing with his own diner, but on a scale he could never have managed alone. Would you? Miranda hesitated. Would you like to see how we run things? Maybe share some of your expertise? Instead of answering, Eli walked over to a sink filled with dishes. He rolled up his sleeves and reached for a sponge, just as he'd done thousands of times in his own diner. Miranda watched him for a moment, then quietly joined him, picking up a dish towel. They worked in silence, falling into an easy rhythm. The simple act of washing dishes together spoke volumes that words couldn't express. It was familiar, comfortable, like the late nights at his diner when they'd cleaned up together, sharing stories and dreams. Through the kitchen windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. The sounds of grateful voices drifted in from the dining room, punctuated by occasional laughter. As Eli handed Miranda another clean plate, their fingers brushed briefly, and neither pulled away too quickly. They continued working side by side, the silence between them growing softer, less strained. With each dish that passed between them, the weight of past hurts seemed to lighten just a little. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The storm arrived without warning. Fat snowflakes swirled against the diner's windows as the wind picked up, transforming Riverbend's quiet streets into a white blur. Inside Eli's place, Miranda wiped down the counter while Eli counted the day's receipts, both of them stealing glances at the worsening weather. "Looks like it's getting bad out there," Eli said, his forehead creasing with concern. He set down his calculator and walked to the window, where the snow was already forming drifts against the glass. Grace pressed her nose to the window, her breath fogging the pain. "It's like being inside a snow globe, Daddy." The diner's bell chimed as a gust of wind blew in a family of four, shivering and stamping snow from their boots. "Our car, it broke down just up the road," the father explained, his teeth chattering. "Everything else in town is closed." "Take a seat anywhere," Eli said without hesitation. "We'll get you warmed up." Miranda was already moving toward the coffee maker. "I'll start a fresh pot." More travelers trickled in as the storm intensified. A truck driver, an elderly couple, 2 college students. Soon, nearly every booth was filled with stranded people seeking shelter from the blizzard. "I'll help," Miranda said, reaching for an apron when she saw Eli's overwhelmed expression. Their eyes met briefly, and he nodded, falling into their old rhythm as naturally as breathing. In the kitchen, they worked in seamless coordination. Eli manned the grill while Miranda assembled sandwiches and ladled out hot soup. The familiar dance of cooking side by side brought back memories of easier days, before complicated truths and misunderstandings had torn them apart. "Just like old times," Miranda said softly, passing him a stack of plates. "Yeah," Eli replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Except this time, I know who you really are." The comment could have stung, but his tone held no bitterness. Instead, there was something almost teasing in his voice. Miranda relaxed slightly, allowing herself to hope. Through the serving window, they could see Grace moving between tables with paper and crayons, entertaining children her age who'd come in with their parents. Her laughter carried over the howling wind outside. "Order up," Eli called, sliding plates of grilled cheese and tomato soup onto the counter. Perfect storm food. Miranda distributed the meals, making sure everyone had enough to eat. When one mother tried to pay, Eli shook his head. "Tonight's on the house," he said firmly. "We all need to look out for each other." The diner glowed warmly against the darkness outside, its windows golden squares in the whiteout conditions. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy and intimate. Strangers, becoming friends over shared meals and stories. As the night wore on, Miranda noticed Eli watching her with a thoughtful expression. She'd shed her designer clothes months ago, but it wasn't until tonight that she felt truly herself, serving others, working hard, finding joy in simple kindness. Around midnight, Grace curled up in her favorite corner booth, her coloring books scattered around her. Eli tucked his coat around her sleeping form, brushing her hair back with gentle fingers. "She's got the right idea," Miranda said, stifling a yawn. "They'd been on their feet for hours." "You should rest too," Eli suggested, noting her exhaustion. "I can handle things for a while." Miranda shook her head stubbornly. "We're in this together." The words carried more weight than she'd intended, and Eli's expression softened almost imperceptibly. They continued working through the night, serving coffee and hot chocolate, making fresh batches of soup, and ensuring their unexpected guests were comfortable. The storm showed no signs of letting up, but inside the diner, no one seemed to mind. As dawn approached, the last of their emergency customers dozed in their booths. Miranda leaned against the counter, her eyes heavy with fatigue. She didn't notice Eli approaching until she felt something warm and familiar being draped over her shoulders. His old army jacket, the one he kept hanging by the kitchen door. Too tired to protest, she let her head rest against the counter, breathing in the familiar scent of coffee and cooking that clung to the fabric. Through half-closed eyes, she saw Eli watching her, his face gentler than she'd seen it in months. Trust, like the morning sun breaking through storm clouds, was slowly returning. In the quiet of the snow-muffled dawn, surrounded by sleeping travelers and the peaceful breathing of his daughter, Eli Brooks finally allowed himself to believe in second chances. The diner had been a beacon through the night, drawing in those who needed shelter. Now, as pale light began to filter through the snow-frosted windows, it had become something more, a place of healing, where old wounds could begin to mend. The early morning sun painted the diner in soft golden hues, its rays reflecting off the pristine blanket of snow outside. Miranda stirred on the worn leather booth where she'd fallen asleep, wrapped in Eli's jacket that still carried the faint scent of coffee and cinnamon. Her back ached from the awkward position, but there was something oddly comforting about waking up in the familiar space. The gentle clinking of pots and pans drew her attention to the kitchen. Through the service window, she could see Eli moving with practiced ease, his movements fluid as he worked the griddle. The aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. "Morning," he called out softly when he noticed her sitting up. "Hope you like your eggs over easy. Some things I still remember." Miranda smoothed her rumpled clothes, touched that he remembered her breakfast preference from her days working here. "You didn't have to do that," she said, folding his jacket neatly. "Maybe not," he replied, sliding 2 perfectly cooked eggs onto a plate. "But I wanted to." She watched as he added crispy bacon and golden hash browns, arranging everything just so. It was such a simple thing, making breakfast, but the care he took spoke volumes. When he brought the plate over, their fingers brushed briefly as she accepted it. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the food. Eli sat down across from her, his own plate untouched as he seemed to gather his thoughts. The morning light caught the silver at his temples, and Miranda noticed the tired lines around his eyes, evidence of their long night helping stranded travelers. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice quiet but steady, "about judgment and assumptions, about how quick I was to believe the worst when that news broke." Miranda sat down, her fork, her heart beating faster. "Eli," he held up a hand gently, "please, let me finish. I was hurt, yes. But I let that hurt blind me to what was right in front of my face. The woman who worked alongside me for those weeks, who connected with my daughter, who showed genuine care for every customer, that wasn't an act. I was wrong to dismiss it all as some corporate scheme." Tears pricked at Miranda's eyes. "I should have been honest from the start," she admitted. "I came here looking to prove something about empathy in business. But what I found was so much more real. Every day I spent here changed me. Your kindness, your faith, the way you treat people. It woke something in me I thought I'd lost." A small smile tugged at Eli's lips. "You know what Grace told me yesterday?" She said, "Daddy, sometimes God sends angels in disguise to help us learn things." Made me think about how quick we are to judge books by their covers, whether they're worn-out coats or designer suits. "Your daughter is wise beyond her years," Miranda said softly. "That she is." Eli reached across the table, hesitated, then gently covered Miranda's hand with his own. "The truth is, what happened can't be erased, but maybe it doesn't need to be. Maybe it's part of both our stories now, how 2 people from different worlds learn to see past appearances to what really matters." Miranda turned her hand over to clasp his, the simple contact grounding her. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said. "It means choosing to build something new from the broken pieces. Like that Japanese art you told me about once? Kintsugi? Fixing broken pottery with gold?" She nodded, touched that he remembered. "Making something more beautiful because of its scars, not in spite of them." The sound of small feet padding across the floor interrupted their moment. Grace appeared in her rumpled pajamas, her hair a mess of tangles, but her smile bright as sunshine when she saw them. "Miss Miranda, you stayed!" She rushed forward, throwing her arms around Miranda in a fierce hug that nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. "Easy there, pumpkin." Eli chuckled, but his eyes were soft as he watched them. Grace didn't let go, instead squeezing herself onto the bench seat next to Miranda. "Did you see all the snow? It's like God wrapped the whole town in a big white blanket." "I saw," Miranda smiled, smoothing the girl's wild hair. "Your daddy and I helped quite a few people who got caught in that blanket last night." "I knew you would," Grace said with complete confidence. You both always help people. That's why you belong together." A charged silence followed her innocent observation. Miranda felt heat rise to her cheeks as Eli's gaze met hers across the table. His hand found hers again, and this time there was no hesitation in his touch. "You know something, Gracie?" he said softly, his eyes never leaving Miranda's. "I think you're right. You belong here," he whispered to Miranda, and the simple truth of it brought tears to her eyes. She smiled through them, squeezing his hand as Grace snuggled closer, the three of them wrapped in the quiet peace of the morning. While outside, the sun turned the fresh snow to diamonds. The morning bustle at Grace's Table Cafe filled the renovated space with warmth and purpose. What was once just Eli's diner had transformed into something greater, a place where kindness wasn't just served, but lived. The familiar chrome and red vinyl booths remained, but new tables filled the expanded dining area, each one marked with a small plaque reading, "All are welcome here." Eli stood behind the counter, watching the scene before him with quiet pride. Veterans in pressed uniforms sat shoulder to shoulder with business people in suits. Single mothers shared coffee while their children played in the newly added corner playroom. The smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee mingled with the sound of laughter and conversation. "Order up," Miranda called from the kitchen, her voice carrying over the buzz of activity. She emerged wearing a simple apron over jeans and a t-shirt, carrying plates of steaming breakfast. Her designer suits and corporate life seemed like a distant memory now. She moved between tables with easy grace, stopping to chat with regulars who had become like family. Grace skipped through the dining room, refilling water glasses with careful concentration. "Miss Jenny needs more napkins," she announced, importantly, taking her role as junior hostess very seriously. Her pigtails bounced as she darted between tables, spreading joy with each interaction. "I'll get those," Eli smiled, reaching under the counter. He watched as Tom, a retired Marine who'd struggled with isolation, taught a young boy how to fold paper airplanes at one of the community tables. These moments of connection happened dozens of times each day now. The wall near the entrance displayed photos of their growing community, volunteers serving at holiday meals, veterans teaching cooking classes, children helping in their new community garden out back. At the center hung their mission statement in Grace's careful handwriting: "Love your neighbor, feed their heart." Miranda approached the counter, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Her cottage down the street was small but cozy, a world away from her penthouse view. Yet her eyes held more peace than they ever had amid corporate luxury. "The breakfast rush is slowing," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "But we've got 3 new volunteers starting this afternoon." "Good timing," Eli nodded. "The dinner service has been getting busier." He didn't add that her presence had made all this possible. She wouldn't want the credit. Instead, he simply smiled, remembering how far they'd come from those first days when she'd arrived as a stranger in worn clothes. The bell above the door chimed as Marcy from the church entered, carrying a box of donated children's books. "These are for the reading corner," she announced. "And I've got 5 more volunteers lined up for next week's cooking classes." The news spread through town had been organic, genuine. Stories of lives touched and hearts healed. No press releases or corporate strategies, just truth lived out daily in plates of food served with dignity and love. Other communities had started reaching out, asking how they could create similar spaces. Grace appeared at Miranda's elbow, tugging gently at her apron. "Can we make extra soup today? Mrs. Peterson said her grandson is sick." "Of course we can, sweetheart," Miranda answered, squeezing the little girl's shoulder. She shared a glance with Eli, both remembering the day she'd first walked into the diner, hungry and pretending to be homeless. Now she understood true wealth had nothing to do with money. The morning light streamed through freshly washed windows, catching the silver in Eli's hair as he moved to help an elderly veteran with his coffee cup. The man had been coming in daily for weeks now, slowly emerging from grief through simple conversation and community. Miranda wiped down the counter, pausing to straighten the framed photos on the wall, snapshots of their growing family of volunteers and regulars. Among them was a news clipping from the local paper, its headline reading, "Grace's Table Cafe, where everyone belongs." The article praised their initiative but missed the heart of it, the daily miracles of human connection happening over cups of coffee and shared meals. Eli excused himself for a moment and walked to a small office in the back. There, on his desk, sat today's newspaper. The headline caught his eye: "Small Town Cafe Sparks Movement of Kindness." He picked it up carefully, reading about how their simple model of community care was inspiring similar initiatives in neighboring towns. His eyes drifted to the framed photograph of Sarah, his late wife, that sat on his desk. Her smile seemed to glow in the morning light, filtering through the window. He lifted the frame gently, tucking the newspaper article behind it. "You'd like her, Sarah?" he whispered softly, touching the glass. "She has your heart for people." The quiet moment held all his gratitude for the past that had shaped him and the unexpected gift of new beginnings. Outside his office, the sounds of the cafe continued, dishes clinking, coffee brewing, and voices sharing stories of hope. Each sound was a reminder that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive in unexpected disguises, asking only for a chance to prove that kindness, given freely, returns multiplied beyond measure. Miranda stood at the window of Grace's Table Cafe, watching the sunrise paint the small town in shades of gold. The smell of fresh coffee and baking bread filled the air as Eli prepared for another day of serving both paying customers and those in need. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a familiar corporate ringtone she hadn't heard in months. "Miranda, the board wants you back," Clara, her former assistant, said without preamble. "Your foundation's success has gone viral. The stock is soaring just from rumors you might return." Miranda's fingers tightened around the phone. What exactly are they offering? Full reinstatement as CEO. Complete control over corporate social responsibility initiatives. They're calling your community kitchen program Visionary now. Clara's voice held a note of irony. Funny how success changes their perspective, isn't it? Through the kitchen window, Miranda watched Eli showing Grace how to fold napkins into swans. The little girl's laughter echoed through the cafe, pure and sweet. "I'll think about it," Miranda said quietly. After hanging up, she walked to the counter where Eli was arranging fresh muffins. "The board wants me back," she said, sliding onto a stool. "They say the company needs my leadership." Eli wiped his hands on his apron and studied her face. "And what do you think?" "I think." Miranda paused, watching an elderly veteran help a young mother carry her baby stroller up the cafe steps. "I think I could do more good with those resources, help more people, fund more kitchens like this." Grace appeared beside her, clutching a handful of slightly crumpled paper swans. "Are you leaving us, Miss Miranda?" Miranda's heart clenched at the worry in the child's voice. "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices." Eli poured 3 cups of hot chocolate, adding extra marshmallows to Grace's. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "leadership isn't about where you sit, it's about how you serve." "What do you mean?" Miranda asked, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "The world doesn't need another CEO behind a desk," Eli said gently. "It needs your heart, your example, the way you've shown that true wealth isn't in bank accounts, it's in how we treat each other." Miranda watched as more people filtered into the cafe. A businessman in an expensive suit sat next to a homeless woman, both enjoying the same fresh breakfast. A group of veterans gathered at their usual table, teaching chess to neighborhood kids. This was what real success looked like. "Maybe," she said slowly, "I don't have to choose. Maybe I can lead from right here." Grace's eyes lit up. "You mean you'll stay?" Miranda smiled. "I can show them a different way to do business." She pulled out her laptop from her bag. "Clara, can you set up a virtual board meeting? I want them to see exactly where I am and what we're doing here." Within an hour, Clara had arranged everything. Miranda set up her laptop in the corner booth, her usual spot for morning coffee with Eli. The familiar faces of the board members appeared on screen, their expressions a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. "Miranda," the board chairman began formally, "we'd like to discuss your return to..." A burst of laughter from the main dining room interrupted him as Grace helped a young veteran blow out birthday candles on a surprise cake. The board members peered curiously at the scene behind Miranda. "Gentlemen," Miranda said, her voice clear and confident, "before we discuss my return, I want you to see what real corporate responsibility looks like." She turned the laptop to show the bustling cafe. "This is Grace's Table Cafe. We serve everyone here, paying customers and those who can't afford a meal. We hire veterans, support single parents, and build community." She shared statistics about how their model had reduced homelessness in the area, improved veteran employment rates, and strengthened local businesses. As she spoke, Eli moved through the cafe, greeting people by name, his natural warmth drawing smiles from everyone he passed. "If you want me back," Miranda continued, turning the laptop back to face her, "this is what you're getting. Not just PR stunts or charitable tax write-offs, but real change. Our company will measure success not just in profits, but in lives transformed." The board members whispered among themselves. Through the screen, Miranda could see the same boardroom where she'd once fought so hard to prove compassion could be profitable. Now, she didn't need to prove anything. The results spoke for themselves. "And where exactly would you be working from?" one board member asked, eyeing the cafe setting with slight disapproval. "Right here," Miranda said firmly. "I'll travel when needed, but my office will be here in Riverbend." Sometimes the best view of the future isn't from a penthouse. It's from a small-town cafe where people help each other. More whispers, more glances. Then the chairman cleared his throat. "We'll need to discuss the logistics." Eli appeared at Miranda's side, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. Grace peeked around him, waving shyly at the serious faces on the screen. Miranda felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'll be right here, doing the work that matters." As the board members began their formal discussion, Eli and Grace stood behind the counter, watching with proud smiles as Miranda showed them all what real leadership looked like. Not from a corporate tower, but from a corner booth in a small-town cafe where everyone was welcome. Miranda adjusted her laptop screen as the board members settled into their leather chairs miles away in New York. The morning sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting a warm glow across the worn wooden tables. Behind her, the familiar clatter of dishes and gentle murmur of conversation created a stark contrast to the sterile boardroom on her screen. "Miss Vale," the chairman began, straightening his tie, "perhaps we should move this discussion to a more appropriate venue?" "Actually," Miranda replied, her voice firm but kind, "this is exactly where this conversation needs to happen." She gestured to the busy cafe around her. "What you're seeing isn't a publicity stunt or a temporary project. This is real leadership in action." A veteran with a cane approached the counter, and Miranda excused herself from the camera. The board members watched, somewhat bewildered, as their former CEO ladled hot soup into a bowl and exchanged warm words with the elderly man. She didn't rush back to the meeting, but took time to help him to a seat. "As I was saying," she continued, returning to view, "leadership isn't about quarterly reports and profit margins alone. It's about understanding the real impact we can have on people's lives." One of the younger board members leaned forward. "But how does serving soup translate to running a Fortune 500 company?" "Watch," Miranda said simply. She turned the laptop to show the morning rush at Grace's Table Cafe. Veterans teaching kids chess. Business people sharing tables with those who couldn't afford breakfast. Volunteers from all walks of life working together. Every person here has a story. Every interaction builds community. This is how real change happens. One meal, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time. The board's live stream had begun attracting viewers. Comments flooded in from across the country as people watched the unusual meeting unfold. Social media buzzed with clips of the CEO serving food while discussing corporate strategy. "Our stock is rising." Clara's voice came through the speakers. "Public response is overwhelming. People are calling it real leadership in action." Miranda didn't react to the news. Instead, she noticed a young mother struggling with a fussy baby while trying to eat. Without hesitation, she muted the meeting briefly and walked over, offering to hold the infant so the exhausted woman could finish her meal. The board members watched in silence as their potential CEO paced the cafe, soothing a stranger's baby while simultaneously addressing their concerns about market strategy. The image was powerful and completely unscripted. "What you're seeing," Miranda explained, returning to her seat with the now sleeping infant, "is the future of business. Not just profit, but purpose. Not just shareholders, but stakeholders. Every person who walks through these doors matters." Eli appeared beside her with fresh coffee, carefully setting it down where the baby couldn't reach. The tender gesture wasn't lost on the watching board members or the growing online audience. "The numbers support this approach," Miranda continued. "Since we opened Grace's Table, local unemployment has dropped 15%. Veteran suicide rates in our area have decreased. Small businesses around us are thriving. This isn't just charity, it's smart business with a soul." The chairman cleared his throat. "While this is all very touching, Miss Vale, running a global corporation requires understanding what real people need," Miranda interrupted, gently. "Every decision we make in that boardroom affects lives. I needed to learn that lesson firsthand." She smiled at Eli as he took the baby back to its mother. "Sometimes the best business education comes from washing dishes and serving soup." The online comments continued pouring in. People shared stories of their own struggles, their own dreams of businesses that could do good while doing well. The meeting had become more than a corporate discussion. It was becoming a movement. The board members whispered among themselves, clearly struck by the authenticity of the scene before them. This wasn't the polished, practiced Miranda Vale they knew. This was someone who had found her true purpose. "Miss Vale," one of the older board members spoke up, "I think we've seen enough." Miranda straightened, ready to defend her position, but the man continued with a slight smile. "We don't need to discuss this further. The vote is unanimous." He paused, looking at his colleagues who nodded. "In agreement. We want you back as CEO, on your terms. Lead from wherever you think best serves our mission." The online audience erupted in virtual cheers. Comments scrolled past faster than anyone could read. Leadership in Action began trending nationwide. Miranda looked around the cafe, at Grace doing homework in her usual booth, at Eli serving breakfast with his quiet grace, at the veterans and locals and strangers who had become family. Her eyes met Eli's across the room, and she saw in his smile everything that mattered. Turning back to the screen, she spoke clearly. "Thank you, gentlemen. Send me the paperwork. But right now, the breakfast rush needs help, and these people come first." She reached for the laptop, pausing for one last moment. "They can wait," she said simply. "I'm home." With that, she closed the computer and stood up, reaching for her apron. There were people to serve, stories to hear, and real work to be done, right where she belonged. The spring morning light danced through the newly cleaned windows of Grace's Table Cafe, catching the polished chrome of the counter and making it sparkle. The familiar bell above the door chimed steadily as customers streamed in for breakfast, their voices creating a warm hum of conversation that filled every corner of the renovated space. Near the entrance, a large framed photograph caught the morning sun. In it, Miranda Vale stood between Eli and Grace Brooks, all three beaming at the camera during the cafe's grand reopening 6 months ago. Grace's gap-toothed smile captured the joy of that day perfectly, while Eli's arm wrapped protectively around Miranda's waist. The simple silver frame bore an engraving, "Where kindness found its way home. Order up for table 7. Eli's voice rang out from the kitchen, steady and cheerful. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon wafted through the air as Miranda expertly navigated between tables, carrying plates stacked with golden pancakes and crispy hash browns. At the counter, 3 veterans sat sharing stories over steaming mugs of coffee. Their meals would be free, just like every other veteran who walked through their doors. One of them, an elderly man with a Korean war cap, raised his mug in greeting as Miranda passed. "Best coffee in Ohio, Mrs. Brooks-to-be," he called out with a wink. Miranda's cheeks flushed pink as she smiled back. The simple engagement ring on her finger caught the light as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. And please, it's still just Miranda." Grace, now 9 years old and wearing a child-sized apron with junior server embroidered on it, carefully carried a slice of cherry pie to a nearby booth. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration as she set it down without spilling. "Here you go, Mrs. Thompson," Grace announced proudly. "My daddy says kindness made us rich, and that's why we make the best pie in town. We put extra love in it." The elderly woman patted Grace's hand. "Your daddy's a wise man, sweetheart. This place is a blessing to Riverbend." The cafe had indeed transformed over the past year. The worn linoleum had been replaced with warm wooden floors, and the walls now displayed local artists' work alongside photos of community events. The Grace's Table program had expanded to 15 other locations across the country, each one partnering with existing diners to create spaces where good food and compassion went hand in hand. In the kitchen, Eli worked the grill with practiced ease, his movements sure and relaxed. The haunted look that had once shadowed his eyes had softened into contentment. He paused occasionally to watch Miranda through the service window, still amazed at how naturally she fit into their world now. The morning rush gradually eased into the quieter lunch hours. Miranda wiped down tables as Eli restocked supplies, their movements around each other as natural as a dance they'd known forever. Grace sat at the counter, working on her homework between helping to refill salt shakers. "Daddy," Grace called out, "can you help me with my essay? We're supposed to write about what makes a home." Eli exchanged a knowing look with Miranda. "Well, sugar, I think you're sitting in the perfect place to write about that." A young couple entered, looking uncertain and tired. Miranda recognized the look. She'd worn it herself, not so long ago. Without hesitation, she guided them to a quiet booth. "First meals on the house," she said softly, placing menus before them. "Everyone deserves a warm welcome." The afternoon passed in a comfortable rhythm of serving, cleaning, and greeting neighbors. Regular customers mixed with travelers passing through, creating a constant flow of stories and connections. Veterans shared tables with business people, elderly couples split pie with young families, and everyone left with full bellies and lighter hearts. As evening approached, the cafe glowed like a beacon in the deepening twilight. The Grace's Table Cafe sign illuminated the street corner, its warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Below it, smaller letters spelled out, "Where love is served daily," words that had become more than just a slogan. Eli and Miranda stood outside, watching families arrive for dinner. The spring air carried the scent of blooming dogwood trees, and somewhere down the street, a church bell chimed softly. Inside, Grace's laugh mingled with the sounds of clinking plates and friendly conversation. Eli took Miranda's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The simple gesture still sent warmth through her heart, reminding her of how far they'd both come. He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the gentle glow from the cafe windows. "You wore rags to find kindness," he said softly, "and you found home instead." The diner sign cast its warm light over them as they stood together, watching their little corner of the world thrive. Grace's Table Cafe glowed against the twilight sky, a testament to the power of open hearts and second chances. Above the door, the words, "Where love is served daily," shone steady and true, promising welcome to anyone who needed it, just as it had for a disguised CEO on a cold morning not so long ago. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Brooks, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.